All right. Welcome back. I see a lot of familiar faces again. So yeah, thank you for joining me again. And I hope yesterday's session was of some use to you. I hope that you were able to learn something from yesterday's session. Just an overview of what ROS is, what its capabilities are, and what is its use case, and what are the possible applications that you can do with ROS. So today we'll be doing another exciting part with ROS. So we'll be exploring some more features of ROS, and you'll be able to see exactly why it's so powerful. Um, and yeah, I just want to know, is there anybody here who's using a dual booted system by any chance? Or is everybody, did anybody try dual booting their systems? Okay, so just as a recommendation, the best way that you can get the most out of ROS is by dual booting your system. Especially if you want to become serious with your ROS development, the best way that you can get the most out of what the ROS ecosystem offers is by dual booting it, or having a standalone system separately only for Ubuntu. I would highly recommend that you do that after this workshop is done, because if you are looking to develop applications with ROS, then trust me, because I've tried. I was quite hesitant in the beginning to not dual boot my system, and the resistance usually is there with everybody, because it's quite risky in some cases. But if you do it correctly, there's not much risk when you're dual booting it. Yeah, but by not dual booting it, there are certain inherent errors that you will face within the system that you will not be able to debug very easily. It's dependent on the virtual machine that you're using. So some people, if you're using VMware virtual versus VirtualBox, then the errors that you might get are different. So first thing I would suggest after this workshop is done is, if you want to get seriously into ROS development, the first thing that you need to do is start dual booting your system. And I would suggest get Ubuntu either 16 or 18, because 16 has support until 2021. And then 18 as well. 18 as well, I think, goes up to 2022. So 18 is quite stable as well. So ROS Melodic as well as Ubuntu 18. So this combination is definitely recommended. And the memory that you would have to allocate for your dual booted system would be about 100 gigabytes. The recommended hardware specifications would be at least 4 gigs of RAM, and then an i5 processor would be necessary, because the kind of stuff that we'll be doing with Gazebo and some other robot simulators requires that sort of computational power. And we looked at it yesterday that one of the limitations of ROS was that you required quite powerful hardware to really get the most out of what it offers. So before I begin today's session, does anyone have any questions about what was taught yesterday? I will, though, go through a recap of exactly what we did yesterday. So yeah, this is how we're going to be structuring it. The first thing is we'll have a small recap of what happened yesterday, and then again I'll just go through the purpose of why we're doing this, and we will be going through ROS launch files, which is another interesting concept. I'll tell you why they're useful and where they're used, and then the really fun part is when we get into Gazebo simulations. We'll be going through what a Gazebo simulator is and what its capabilities are, and then what a URDF is, and why we require URDFs, and then finally the introduction into the ROS navigation stack. And this is particularly important because most of the jobs today that you see in robotics is revolving around navigation and perception. So as a quick question, how many of you here want to pursue a career in robotics? Right. So Abhinash asks, what are the career options in it? So robotics is, a really vast field, and you've got so many various subcomponents to it. So you've got, controls is a major part. Control algorithms, writing nonlinear equations for, controlling your robot manipulators if you're working with, a non-mobile manipulator. And then, so robotics, you can divide into non-mobile and mobile robotics. So non-mobile is when you have robotic arms or something which is stationary in a place and it does its industrial, tasks. So most of these industrial robots are all non-mobile in nature, but most of these days we can see that mobile robotics are getting more and more popular. And mobile robotics specifically, if you might not think of this as a robot, but the Tesla's fleet of cars, the Tesla Model S, Model X, these guys, Tesla's entire range of cars are actually in a sense robots. They're just mobile robots. They have cameras, 3D cameras on them, which will allow autonomous navigation and self-driving. And so self-driving cars currently are a really trending career option, and one of the most high paying jobs in robotics is in perception. So what I mean by perception is getting depth data from a camera and using that depth data in order to perform certain navigation tasks. So several companies today are hiring robotics engineers specifically for perception. It's one, and computer vision is definitely another part. So any robot will definitely, at least in today's situation, yes, you can have a career in the hardware side. So if design of robots, so I'm a mechanical engineer by trade. So I'm also my specialty is also in design, and so the hardware side. When you go into the embedded systems and hardware side, you also have a wide range of career options in that end as well. So yeah, hardware is definitely a large part of robotics. So if you look at robotics, right, it's an amalgamation of various fields of engineering that come together. And robotics, as a robotics engineer, you need to have diversity in your skill sets. So even if you are from say a computer science background, it's very important that you know how a robot is designed. Even if you are from a particular branch of engineering or whatever your field is, if you're going into robotics, you will need to have the mentality of expanding your horizons into every aspect of robotics, because a robot is an integrated system that usually has it needs all of these things to work together in harmony. And as well as when things work in harmony, you'll need to know uh, debugging is probably the most important thing that you will need to be aware of when you're working with robots. And so a basic knowledge of all the subcomponents of robots is definitely an important aspect when you're trying to um, when you're trying to design a robot, right? So so having said that, let's start with a quick recap of what was done yesterday. So what we spoke about yesterday was what is about why ROS was essential in the first place. So just as a recap, ROS was developed because there's a requirement for an open source open source development platform, so that when people are developing robots which have several complexities, they don't have to start developing every subcomponent of its software from scratch. And also the ability for various robot creators from all over the world to collaborate is one of the main reasons for why ROS is used. And also, since it's open source and free, you can use packages from other people and use that as a baseline for you to develop more and more applications through it. Then coming to the merits and limitations, the merits I just briefed about right now, and the limitations are that it requires really powerful hardware, and secondly, if you're using it in an industrial scenario, sometimes you have issues with security. You also need to have uh, with ROS, if you're developing novel applications, in that case, you need to ensure that you can just use you just use the existing ROS packages as a reference, but most of the work that you'll have to do is on your own, especially if you're doing something which is very novel. However, developing novel applications and then posting it to the open source society does have its merits. The fact that people can let what are the problems that you're having with the package, or they might give you new ideas to improve upon it. Then we spoke about what nodes are. So nodes are basically programmable executables that you have within your ROS environment. So anytime you want your robot to perform a specific function, then that particular function is written as a node. And nodes can be of two types. They can either be publishers or subscribers. Publishers are those kind of nodes that send out data, which can then be listened to by other nodes. And those nodes that listen to this kind of data are called subscribers. So these are the two types of nodes. And as someone else pointed out yesterday, a node does not have to just subscribe to one topic. It can send out many topics, and a particular node can also subscribe to many topics at the same time. And also, there was another good question yesterday saying, if you develop a node in Python, can a C++ node, subscribe to that data? Definitely. ROS is cross-platform compatible, which means it can support a wide variety of programming languages. And so, a node that you write with one programming language is always accessible through throughout. And then the way that nodes send out data is through something called messages, and these messages are sent across through topics. Topics are basically channels using which the nodes send out data, and messages are basically data structures which indicate the type of data that the node is communicating or transferring between one player from the different nodes. So these were what we spoke about in terms of the communications that happens in ROS, and then we spoke about what the ROS master does. So the ROS master is essentially like the orchestra's conductor. So the master is of what ensures communication between the nodes happens correctly, because the nodes, even if they do exist, they will never know what is the other node that exists. So for them to communicate with one another, a master has to be there in order to direct them to one another and say, yeah, there is a node, and this is the name of the node, and this is the message that it's publishing, and this is the topic in which it's publishing, and so you will have to listen to this in order to get this particular data. So this kind of instruction on which node subscribe to which other node is coordinated by your master. And coming to publishers and subscribers that we wrote yesterday, these are basically nodes that one node sends messages and the other node receives the messages. And you have RQT underscore graph, which is a visualization tool which will allow you to see how these nodes are communicating with each other. And if in case sometimes the node is not able to send message from one to another, in that case you can use the RQT graph function as a useful debugging tool in order to find out why that's happening. So these were a highlight of what was covered yesterday, and I told you that I would be talking to you about what ROS launch files are, because we'll be using them extensively today in today's session as well. So what are launch files? Now, if you remember what we did yesterday, you had written a node for a publisher and you had written a node for a subscriber. And in order for you to execute those nodes, what did you do? So you initially opened up something called ROS core. ROS core essentially had the master, which it launched, and then a couple of essential topics, which it launched as well. And then that allowed the ROS master to communicate and ensure that the two nodes that is there within your system are able to communicate with one another. And so every time you had to launch a node, you had to launch the ROS run command each time. Now, in a complicated robotic system, in most robots, you will definitely have multiple sensors, and multiple sensors will be publishing a lot of data. And so it's completely impractical for you to open your shell every time and execute the ROS run function, right? It's not practical. It's very time consuming. And so you will need to have a walkthrough to ensure that the nodes are, every time there's one single command that you have to run every time you want to start your robot, that will ensure that all the required nodes are run at the same time. So that's what a launch file does. So it's a convenient way to start the master, and multiple nodes can be launched simultaneously. And then it also sets up some other initialization requirements, such as parameters. So in case yesterday we also saw that we wanted to publish that message called hello world that we were publishing from the publisher, and the subscriber had to take that message, and the callback function had to print it on the screen. So if there's a requirement to print it on the screen, so then the launch file has to have those specifications that that give out those requirements so that it understands what it's supposed to do. So the ROS launch files and ROS are basically launched using this following syntax. You have the command called ROS launch, followed by the package name, and then followed by the launch file name. So it's very similar to the syntax that we used for ROS run yesterday. So what did we do yesterday? What we did was ROS run followed by hello underscore ROS followed by the name of the file. So in either listener.py or talker.py. So that was the syntax for ROS run, and similarly there's also the similar syntax for ROS launch. You have to first start by typing out ROS launch followed by the name of the package, in which case, in our case, it will be hello underscore ROS and then the launch file. So we'll be creating one right now. So let me just walk you through what a ROS launch file looks like. So it's written in the XML format, and usually the XML format has the following syntax. So usually you start off with a root called launch, and then within that you have another. You write nodes in this way. So you have a node followed by the syntax goes like this. The first argument there is package equals hello underscore ROS, and then the type is equal to talker.py. and the name of the topic that under which it publishes is called, so the name of the node is called Talker. And so this is the way that you initialize a node. And then the same thing for the second node as well. The name of the node is hello underscore Ross. The type of the node is listener.py. The name of the node that we've given is listener, and then the output, it has to publish the messages. As I said before that, there has to be some initialization requirements like setting parameters. In this case, this is what we're doing. Output equals screen ensures that we are publishing the messages that we receive out and onto the screen. So this is a very basic launch file. This is what a launch file looks like. And right now, what I would want you to do is go back to your ROS Development Studio, make sure that you log in, and I'll guide you through how to make a launch file, and we'll run the launch file for the same publisher and subscriber node that you wrote yesterday. Right, so let's just wait for it to load, and then in the meantime, I can just start with the other topics in the interest of time. So I'd like to start now with a very cool feature that ROS supports. It's called a Gazebo simulator. So let's just look through what Gazebo is and what its capabilities are. So the Gazebo simulator is essentially a popular robotic simulator which is used with ROS. So some other robotic simulators that you can have with ROS are called RViz, and then you have another one called VDEP, which stands for Virtual Robot Experimentation Platform. And then you also have another platform called Copelia Sim. And then PyBullet is also another simulator. So all of these are various third-party simulators which ROS has integrated support for. So PyBullet is not straightforward to set up, but it is possible. Copelia Sim, RViz, and Gazebo are all integrated right within ROS. So the difference between Gazebo and RViz, which both will be using today, Gazebo is an example of a dynamic simulator which has physics engines built in. RViz is more of a kinematic simulation engine where you don't have the dynamic features always. So most dynamic simulations are done on Gazebo. So what do I mean by dynamics is when you have a force or a torque which is acting on the robot, then you will have to see what the effects of it are on Gazebo. And RViz is usually there for kinematic visualizations. So wherein you see how a particular joint moves of a robot and so on. So Gazebo simulator is very similar to a game engine, but it produces better simulations and it offers a wide suite of sensors and also a bunch of interfaces for both users as well as programs. Now, what do I mean by that is you can set up a bunch of sensors like if you're say doing a line follow robot, then you would require an IR sensor, which can be directly incorporated. You will have to write something called Gazebo plugins for each sensor. So that's more into the advanced side of how Gazebo works when you're writing your own robot. But for today's exercise that we'll be using with Turtlebot, the sensors and the plugins are all already written onto the robot, and so we don't have to do any particular coding with these or make any modifications to the Gazebo files. So the components of a Gazebo simulations are like this. So first you have something called a world file. Now, what is a world file? As logically as it seems, it's just the environment within which you try to navigate your robot within. So a world file is basically the environment within which the robot navigates, and then it moves around, and then it does its particular function. And then after the world files, you have something called the models. Now, models refers to both the robots, which can be either mobile or non-mobile, as well as some other objects within the environment. So these can be obstacles in their environment that the robots have to avoid. Then you also have the GZ server, which is basically the Gazebo server, the backend which is used to populate a world. It's basically a node which is used to set the parameters that the world file consists of. And then the GZ client is what connects to the GZ server, and it allows the visualization of all the elements from the world file. So all the properties of the world file are then visualized by the GZ client. So these are just basic components of how the Gazebo simulator functions. And then we'll go on to what the launch file for any Gazebo simulator looks like. So in the previous slide, we just looked at, on a very broad scale, what was a launch file. So if you remember, there was a node, two nodes, and then the nodes were given a specific name, and then the nodes were the name of the nodes as well as the all right. I'm hearing that the slide isn't visible. Is it the same problem with the others as well? Are you not able to see the slide? All right. All right, cool. So this is an example of what a complicated launch file, which is usually there in most of the Gazebo launch files. So how it there are a bunch of arguments that we first define in a launch file that is used for Gazebo, and you will have to do this when you're making your own Gazebo files and when you're making your own robots. And the reason that I'm going through this right now is so that it'll become easy for you to understand what these parameters mean later on when you're creating your own robots. So the first one is the world file, and we are defining an empty world. And then the paused argument here, when we say it's false, means that every time we run this launch file, the Gazebo simulator immediately starts without any delay. And use sim time equals true means that we'll be using the real time in order to measure how much time elapses. The GUI allows you to see the Gazebo simulation. The debug is used to if you're getting any error messages, then the debug will print these messages. And what Headless does is that it logs all the activities that is going on and it stores it to a file. So all of these are all debugging tools. Right now it's not very important, but you need to know what the purpose of all of these are. So that's the reason I'm going through these. Yeah, and then these are the launch files to execute your Gazebo with the world that you create. So the various arguments there would be the name of the world that you create. So every time you create a world, right, you need to give it a particular name. You can create your customized world files, and then you can create your customized world files, and then you can make your robot navigate through these. So when you create your own world, you need to give it a specific file, and so you'll have to give the location of that world file. And then you have another sim time, which these basically have the same meaning as what I just described. And then defining our robot URDF. Now I'll just get back to you about what URDF is in the coming slides. But basically, in a gist, it's just the way that the simulators understand what the robots look like in the. So if you have a three-dimensional model of the robot, you will have to ensure that the simulator that you're using understands and can actually interpret what that robot looks like. So you will have to break it down for your simulator to understand into a particular format. And so that format is what we refer to as URDF, and that URDF stands for Unified Robot Description Format. So I'll be talking more about more detail about that in the coming slides. And then we have to then add our robot in the Gazebo simulation, and the same syntax we use for the launching the node, as we discussed in in 2 slides before this. So the name of the node followed by the package in which it's in, and then the output onto the screen, and then you give some arguments. And these are very model specific, so you don't have to worry about what these mean right now. So we won't be. This is not really necessary for today's tutorial. But anyway, this is the basic structure of what your launch file will look like. And then when you're making your own robot, you will need to define these and write your own customized launch files for your Gazebo simulation. Right, and so I briefly discussed about what URDFs were in the previous slide. As I said, URDFs basically stand for Unified Robot Description Format. And it's basically a format for robot visualization in simulators. And this format is the only format that most of these simulators can understand. And this is also written in XML. And it's the file extension that you would see in your URDF for most of the URDFs is called Zacro. And Zacro is just an abbreviation for XML macros. So if you condense that, then what you get is a Zacro file. So the XML format for representing the kinematics and basic physics descriptions of the robot. So what do I mean by that? So when you have to define a particular robot and you want to communicate that to the simulator on what it looks like, you will have to have a set of parent-child relationships. So you will have a parent link, which in this case, let's take a look at this example. There is one link here, and that link has all the other links attached to it. And so that base link or the parent link is basically where the base of the robot lies, and it's usually at the origin. And that parent link is what causes the other links of the robot to be joined to it. So if you have a robotic arm and say the robotic arm has 2 joints, wherein it has 2 joints and say 3 links, in that case, what happens is the first link will be your parent, which is then attached to 2 other links. So you will have to define a parent and child sort of relationship when you're defining your URDF. So this is just a small excerpt of what it looks like. So what other properties that you can see are, every time you define a link, you'll need to give it a unique name. and then you can describe the visual properties of that particular link, and then you have the geometrical properties of that link, and then the origin properties, and then the RPY, which stands for roll, pitch, and yaw. These values are also assigned, and then this box size is basically a bounding box that encapsulates the entire three-dimensional structure. And then the material name here, you're just giving. Suppose you're having a robot which is made of mild steel, mild steel link. In that case, you'll have to name it accordingly, or you can give the. You don't have to necessarily define the material if you're not looking to get the dynamic properties out of the simulation. And so when you can define colors here, and then you can give the values of the RGB, the RGB values for that particular color, and then you can, and then we use this slash followed by the tag to end that particular property, and then we close the root link through this similar tag. And then, yeah, you have this is another example. Again, link name is gripper, and then the geometry file. And then sometimes you have a mesh file. So in that case, sometimes it becomes necessary for you to. So when you're converting when converting a 3D model to URDF, you get two kinds of files. You get a URDF file as well as a mesh file. These mesh files basically encapsulate the three-dimensional properties of that particular link, and so you can specify that directly, or you can describe the properties individually also. And then you have visual properties for geometry, and then these geometrical properties also you can define. So these are all examples of how an URDF is constructed. So it's quite straightforward in terms of what in terms of its understanding. You can also have so as I said, it's a kinematic a description of the robot. So you can also have some other properties like the inertial properties of the robot. So in case you want to have a dynamic simulation happening, then you can also have inertial properties and the joint properties, like you can describe the type of joint. So in robotics, usually we describe the joints as being of two kinds. You have a prismatic joint and a revolute joint. A prismatic joint is basically one which allows you to slide from one direction, which allows a sliding motion, and then a revolute joint allows rotational motion. Those are two kinds of joints, and then we have continuous joints, and combinations of these joints will also result in other types. So based on your robot model, you can also define the type of joint that you're using. So yeah, these are all the types of these are all the properties that you would assign to a particular URDF. Right. So just before we go on to that, I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes to open your ROS Development Studio, and then finish the exercise on creating your own ROS launch file. Up till this point about Gazebo and about URDFs, does anyone have any questions? Okay, so just go to the workspace that you created yesterday, which is basically I created one called workshop_workspace, and within that we created 3 folders: build, devil, and source. And within that we have a full package that we created called hello_ROS. And then yesterday we created a folder called scripts, within which we wrote the talker.py and the listener.py. And then we have a folder called launch, which has under which I've written a new file called the hello_ROS.launch. So here, what I would want you to do is just make sure that this is loaded up. And once you're here, navigate to the package that you wrote yesterday, and then right click on here, and then you can just type in, click on new file. And then when you click on new file, just call it hello_ROS .launch. So .launch is the extension that we use for a launch file. Since I already have it, I'm not going to create another one. And when I open my ROS launch file, I just have this very simple setup here, which is basically what I described to you. So I'm just going to give you a couple of minutes, type this out, and then we'll get started. I'll just give you a couple of minutes so that we can all get onto the same page. So the rest of you, if you've completed this, you can just open your shell, and then make sure you go into the package that you created. And then just ensure that CatCanMake is working fine. And so the command, as I told you before, it is ROS launch followed by the name of the package. In this case, it is hello_ROS followed by the name of the node. So we called it hello_ROS.launch. So I think I have to do a devil setup before that. Yeah. So source. Right. And so let's try that again. So can you guys see this? It's the same thing that we had done yesterday, but if you observe that we were able to run the entire thing with just one command rather than having to type ROS core followed by ROS run, and then followed by again another ROS run. So if let me just stop this and let's just observe what happened. If you see this, when ROS launch started running, there was a master that was automatically created. So here there was an auto starting of a new master, and so every time you run a launch file, you don't have to create a master. And also, if you want to run a run file after running a launch file, in that case also you don't have to create a master, because the same master can be used to coordinate the communication between a launch file as well as a ROS run file. So in case someone has a question on that. So yeah, just let me know if you were able to get this output. Let me know in the chat if you were able to get this. And then yesterday I got a couple of emails from you guys that so a few people couldn't see the RQT underscore graph. So let me just show you how that works again. So here you just have to go to graphical tools, and then open another shell. And then here when you type RQT underscore graph, it should pop up on the screen. If it doesn't, then you'll just have to restart this and then try again. So here it's popped up again. So this is what you should be getting. Just let me know in the chat if you've been able to run the launch file, and second of all, if you're getting the RQT underscore graph. So let's just first of all talk about what the fundamentals of the navigation stack are. So what do we mean by navigation? So when we talk about navigation, we usually talk about three distinct terms. So the first thing is called robot localization. Now, robot localization is basically the process of determining where a mobile robot is with respect to its environment. And then when we are using the ROS environment for localizing a robot, there is a particular package that has already been tried and tested by ROS developers, and it's called AMCL, and it stands for Adaptive Monte Carlo Localization. And the way that it works is that it uses probabilistic localization techniques using particle filters to track the pose of a robot. Now, what do I mean by pose? Pose refers to both the XYZ coordinates as well as its roll, pitch, and yaw. So a set of six coordinates will completely describe the robot's position in space within the simulation environment. So that's what we mean by localization. And when we look at a particular robot which needs to autonomously navigate in its environment, the first thing that it needs to do is it needs to know what its environment looks like in the first place before it starts navigating within it. So the first stage of when you're trying to when we are trying to make a robot autonomously navigate, is that after localizing the robot, we have to start mapping the environment in which it's placed. And for mapping, we have specialized sensors that require three-dimensional depth data of the surroundings. And so for that, typically we use a LiDAR or we use a three-dimensional camera. So a 3D camera. So if you've heard of the Xbox Kinect, that's a very popular camera that most people use. There are also a bunch of other cameras that, for example, the Intel RealSense is one camera. Then there are also a bunch of 3D cameras by Asus and a bunch of other companies as well. So yeah, there are a bunch of cameras that you can try out. But if you want to build your own robot or build your own autonomous robot at home, the cheapest option that is available to you is probably the Xbox Kinect. On Amazon, you can buy one of the older Xbox versions, the Kinect from the older ones, and so you'll get that usually at a more affordable price. Yeah, so that's if you want to experiment with SLAM and stuff at home, then that's the camera that I would recommend. And so when you're doing autonomous navigation, you need to do two things simultaneously. That is, you need to make sure that you know where you're going, as well as you need to know what's around you. So you need to start mapping the environment. At the same time, you need to know where you are in the environment. So because if you don't know where you are and you just remember the stuff that's around you, then there's no point, because then the robot will never be able to reconstruct what it sees into a meaningful map that it can then later on recall for use later on. So the process of autonomous navigation includes something called simultaneous localization and mapping, which is what SLAM stands for. So that process involves a continuous feedback process of localization of the robot as well as mapping. So there are certain sensors that we use for localization, and usually it's we call those sensors as encoders. So these are encoders are basically of several types. Usually the most popular ones are Hall effect sensor encoders. So the way that it works is there's usually a magnetic sensor, a Hall effect sensor, and every time a wheel rotates, there is a pulse which is detected by the magnetic sensor, and every time there's a pulse, then it knows that there's one complete revolution of the wheel which is completed. And if you know the dimensions of the wheel, what is the diameter of the wheel, and what is the thickness of the wheel, then you can accurately predict how much distance has the robot moved from its starting position. So this is how you do localization. You also have other forms of localization. For example, if you have a camera on the robot, in that case you can use something called visual mode of localization. The word localization, actually, with this process of knowing where you are with respect to your initial position, is actually called odometry. And if you look at this diagram here, prediction of position is called, the technical term, we call it as odometry, and then we get that from an encoder. That encoder, so it can also be rotary encoders. We have Hall effect sensor encoders, and then, as I said, you have visual encoders. Now, has anyone heard of Aruco and Vicon markers? So these are basically two kinds of markers that are typically used for visual localization. So these are unique markers which have a unique ID associated with each one. And so in most robotics labs, if you see, you'll be able to see a bunch of it looks kind of like barcodes, but it's Vicon markers are basically concentric circles of white and black. Vicon markers allow you to get the position of a particular place, but it won't let you know what the orientation of the robot is. But in case of an Aruco marker, you can get both the position as well as the orientation of a robot using just computer vision. So I would definitely recommend that you read about those. Let me just type out what those sensor markers are, so that later on when you get time you can Google and check these out. So these are all useful forms of visual odometry. So if you look at the entire SLAM problem, and if we have to formalize the SLAM problem, then given the fact that you have robots controls, we'll represent the robots controls as U1 of t, and U1, U2, U3 are the various controls that are available with it. And then given the fact that your camera makes certain observations, we denote this by Z, and then say Z1, Z2, Z3, up to ZT until the time that you're running this entire simulation. If these are the various observations that you're getting from the sensors, then what we need is a map of the environment, which we denote by M. And if you want to go from point A to point B, we need to compute what the path of the robot should be to get from A to B. And so we have various path planning algorithms. There's one more algorithm that we usually call, it's called rapidly exploring random trees. And we call that as an RRT algorithm. So I'll type that out here. So these are just small extensions that I would highly recommend that you read upon. Right. So RRT, which stands for rapidly exploring random trees. So this is another type of path planning algorithm that most robots use. There's also various other algorithms like the A-star algorithm. So these are all the different types of optimization and path planning algorithms that, if given initial position and given a destination, a robot needs to go from point A to point B. And I mean, the details of this are outside the scope of the workshop. So that's the reason I'm just giving you pointers so that you can later on look at these in your own time. Right. So the goal of SLAM is to make the robot navigate autonomously from one point to another. So how do we do that now? So when we to get started with navigation with ROS, we'll have to understand what the various components of the ROS navigation stack is. So the ROS navigation stack is completely built on top of ROS, and you will need to know a few things with regard to how this is built in order for you to start using it. So let's start firstly with the transform frame. So As you know, in the URDF, I just explained to you that there is a centralized coordinate frame which is associated with the base link, and every other link that you have in your robot will have a certain coordinate system which is local to that particular frame. So when you are doing autonomous navigation, you will have to know the relationship between the various coordinate frames in order to calculate something called your transform matrix. And this transform matrix basically tells you how two different coordinate frames are related to one another. So that's the first component that you need, so that when you have to go from one point to another, the coordinate frames that you use for doing so, you will need to know how they're related so that you can compute the path accordingly. So the first thing is the transform frame, and then you can compute what the transformation matrix is between the various coordinate systems that you have in your model. And then second of all, we go to the timestamp. So this timestamp tells you it tells the navigation stack the time at which this input was taken. Now, you will have a continuous stream of data coming from the various sensors that you have embedded in your system. So in order for you to really know what you need to know when you got a certain segment of data, so that you can map that the segment of data to a particular position in space. So unless you know which data comes where, you won't know where you saw, what you saw when, if you can understand. So that's the reason it's very important that you ensure that there's a timestamp associated with every input feed of data. So that's the second component of the ROS navigation stack. And the third component is the odometry. Now, I briefly discussed that in the previous slide as well. The odometry basically, it tells the navigation stack where the particular robot is with respect to where it initially began. So it's a combination of both translational values as well as rotational values. So rotational values are roll, pitch, and yaw, and translational values are the X, Y, and Z coordinates of a particular robot. And then you also have the scan component. So the scan component, as I said, you will need either a 3D camera or you will need a LiDAR. So this data from a LiDAR or from a 3D camera is what we refer to as the scan data. And this is then sent as the input data into the navigation stack. And then you need to have map data as well. So now map data, what you mean by map data is basically it's a pre-built representation of the environment of the robot, and it's given by the server, or it's either given by the server by, so you can build the map of an environment either by using the robot itself, or if you know the map beforehand, you can also create your own map by using some third-party software, and then you can convert that into the required file format, and then you can feed that into your navigation stack. So you can either construct the map by using the robot, or you can feed a pre-built map. There are two options that are available. So if you're feeding a pre-built map, or if you've done the mapping prior and then you've stored it somewhere else, then the map server is what feeds the map into the ROS navigation stack. And then finally, when we have the data about what the robot where the robot is, and then what data it's getting in, and then what the environment is in which it needs to navigate, you need to get something called the twist data. Now, this twist data is basically a node which will tell you what the orientation of the robot should be, and given the map input and given the odometry input. So the twist basically tells you the orientation of the particular robot, and then using a path planning algorithm, either A star or RRT or some other inbuilt algorithm, you can find out what the you can compute what the XYZ coordinates have to be, and then the twist will give you the various orientation parameters. So these are the basic components of the ROS navigation stack. And we'll be looking at how these are all structured within your ROS navigation stack later on. So if we have to formalize this entire thing, this is what you see in the ROS wiki when you want to do your when you see the tutorials on ROS navigation stack. This is what they will show you. So with that brief introduction, you can see that the ROS navigation stack is split into three parts. It starts with an input. Input is so AMCL is the localization algorithm, adaptive Monte Carlo localization, and then it has sensor transforms. So each sensor also will have its own coordinate frame of reference, and the joint of the robots will have its own coordinate frame of reference. So the TF basically forms the transformation between them. So you don't have to calculate these for the exercise that we are doing today. So this is already, the TF package is already inbuilt within the ROS architecture, and so that will automatically calculate all of these transforms for you. And then the odometry source. The odometry source basically comes from an encoder. Encoders can be either magnetic or visual or rotary encoders, and then you'll get where the robot is with respect to where it started out. And then these are the various inputs that you given. And then you have something called a global planner, and then you have a local planner within the ROS navigation stack. Now, the package, I said that there are various, path planning algorithms like RRT and A-star. There is a package called MoveBase within ROS, which has already written these kind of path planning algorithms embedded, and it has it within it. This MoveBase is basically what takes in all of this input and then plans a path given a destination. So the global planner, there are two kind of planners within this MoveBase package. The one is called the global planner, the other one is called the local planner. So as the name suggests, a global planner forms the overall path from the source to the destination, given the map input and given the fact that you know where the robot is, which is forms the initial position, and then you can define where the end position has to be. So that will form your destination. So given those 2 points, the global planner broadly plans out a path that the entire robot has to take. But then it's a computationally expensive process to only go by what the global planner says, because sometimes you would also know that there are obstacles in your way, and so sometimes when you have sensors like an ultrasonic, or when you use your 3D cameras itself to find out if there are obstacles on the path of the robot from the source to the destination, then you will have to make certain modifications to that inbuilt path. Now remember that global planner only makes a path based on prior information. So when you make a map of an environment, maybe there are obstacles in that environment beforehand, maybe there are no obstacles in that environment. But later on, the map of the environment, even though it remains constant, the various objects that are variables within that environment will keep changing. And so in order to account for those variations, we also have something called a local planner. A local planner takes into account the various obstacles that are available, and the cost, the local cost map and the local planner work together. So what do you mean by cost map is when your robot is placed in a particular position, a cost map basically generates values of it's like when you have a high resistor within an electrical conductor, the lesser current goes through the high resistance path, and then more current goes through the more current goes through the less resistance path, and the high resistance path has less current through it. So in such a scenario, if you look at obstacles also in a similar fashion, there is a greater favorability to go towards a path which has lesser obstacles. And so the local cost map and the local planner work together in such a way that the local path planning always ensures that it computes values such that the local planner always follows the path of least resistance. So, but we also need to ensure that the local planner, by doing that process, does not drift away from its goal. And so the global planner and local planner work together in such a way that even though there are certain local maneuvers from the global path, it always ensures that it goes in the direction of the destination, and it doesn't maneuver and drift away from the path it's supposed to go, or drift away from its destination. And so it provides and by the global cost map and local cost map together work so that they can provide certain recovery behaviors. Recovery behaviors are basically if there is a large error from where you are currently and where you're supposed to be, then there's a recovery maneuver that is performed so that it comes back to the path in which it's supposed to be. So this anytime you see something with a backslash, it means that we are specifying a topic. So in this case, you can see that the map server produces data in the form of the map data under a topic called /map, and then the message type which it publishes this message is called nav_messages /get map. And then you also have sensors which have sensor topics, and these publish the messages these publish the messages under the sensor topics of the message type sensor_messages /laser scan if you're using a LiDAR, and sensor_messages /point cloud if you're using a 3-dimensional camera. And then finally, given the input and given the ROS navigation stack, the output that you're supposed to get is geometry_messages /twist. And then the velocity of the motors, or the kind of basically the velocity of the various actuators that you have in your joint, is the output that it gets out. So this is just an overview of the entire ROS navigation stack and how it's all structured. So at this point, does anyone have any questions? Because I know that was a lot for you to take in. I'm going to stop for a couple of minutes so that you can think about what I just told you, so that you can, and if you have any questions, you can ask me. Right. So before we move on, I'll just summarize what we just spoke about. There is, for a robot to navigate autonomously, there needs to be information about where is it in the particular environment. You need to know what the environment looks like, and the package used for knowing where it is in the environment is called AMCL, which stands for Adaptive Monte Carlo Localization. And then the process of modeling the environment using the sensor data is called the mapping process. And the mapping process usually uses data from typically two sensors are used, and these are either LiDAR or 3D camera. Types of 3D cameras that you can use. The one I usually recommend is Xbox Kinect. And then the process of simultaneously knowing where you are in the map, as well as mapping the rest of the parts of the environment, is called simultaneous localization and mapping. And that's the problem that we're trying to solve. And odometry is the name that's given to the process of finding out where you are currently with respect to where you were initially. And map data is usually provided by the map server. The map can be either pre-built through a data that you already knew about where the environment of the robot is, or you can build the map data uh, using the robot by making it move around within the environment. And twist refers to the output of the ROS navigation stack, which basically tells you what the orientation of the robot has to be. And the move base package within ROS allows you to plan the path from the initial point to the destination. And so, yeah, let's now go back to ROS Development Studio. I'll go walk you through the structure of what the ROS navigation stack looks like. So if you look at the navigation stack, you have three folders. One is called config. Sometimes this is also called params. And within that, we have the local cost map, the global cost map, the common configuration, and the base local planner. These are what we spoke about in the previous slide. And then a launch file is there also within it. And then that launch file has a map. It has a transform. The transform basically tells you how different coordinate frames are related to one another. And then you have the AMCL package, which stands for the localization node. And then you also have the move base package, which allows you to move from one point to another. And then you also have another folder called maps, which has maps stored in two different formats. One is called PGM, and then the other is of extension YAML. The PGM is basically a two-dimensional representation of the map, and then a YAML file has properties of the map stored within it. Okay, so before I talk to you about this, let's go back to the ROS Development Studio, and then I'll talk to you about the various components of various components of how the ROS navigation stack is organized. So first start by opening a new shell. And then we'll be launching a package which is called, okay, there's this one really useful tool in ROS. It's the name of the command is ROS CD. And you can type the name of the package that you've created, and it'll directly take you to that particular location. And so there's a package which is already built into this environment, which is called turtlebot_navigation. So I want you guys to go into this particular directory, right? Now type ls, and then the various files I just spoke to you about, you can see them all listed here. The first one is called param. The second one is called maps. Next one is called launch. And then you have another one called laser. So we'll go into that later on. But we have these three files. Can you all see this? When you type ls, you should be able to see these. Okay. So now let's just briefly explore what it has. Let's first cd into the maps folder. And then if you type in ls, there are two files here, as I said before. One is called the PGM file, which is basically a 2D representation of the map. And then another one is called the YAML file, which basically talks about how the map is, what it gives you information about the map. So let's just explore what this YAML file contains. So if you type the cat command, basically allows you to view the contents of the file within Linux. So just type in cat followed by Willow 2010, and then you can just use tab complete in order to get this entire file name, and then just type in .yaml, and then you'll be able to see this. So within this, if you see, there's an image which is basically, it points to the 2D representation of this, and then it gives you what the resolution of that map is. And then while you're mapping, what was the starting point of the robot is what is this. So the origin of the robot from where the mapping from where the mapping began is 000. And then you have another one called an occupancy threshold. And then you have another parameter here called free threshold. Now, what does this mean? So occupancy threshold and free threshold. So when you have a lidar or you have a 3D camera, you need to know if there is an obstacle occupying a particular point in space or not. So if there is a square, if there is a grid that if you imagine that your entire space is divided into grids, and then if a particular object lies, say, 65% into that grid, then it will map that particular grid as being occupied. That's what the occupancy threshold means. If a particular object occupies 65% or more of that particular grid, then in that case, it is marked as occupied. And you can see, well, during the mapping process, you will see that that particular grid will appear in a dark color. And then the free threshold, if in a free threshold, it's usually marked as free if there is less than 19.6% of occupancy. So that is what these two parameters mean. And so you have your two-dimensional map file as well as your YAML file, which has all of these properties about them. So the resolution will again depend on the kind of hardware that you're using for mapping. Right, so let's go back into our root directory again, into the turtlebot underscore navigation, and type ls again. We'll see that there is another folder called launch. Let's go into that launch file. And then here you see there are two different launch files, gmapping underscore demo.launch and amcl underscore demo.launch. So are you guys able to see that as well? Is everybody able to see this? The amcl underscore demo and gmapping underscore demo. Yeah, so now let's just go into one of these. Let's go into amcl underscore demo. So as you can see, this is the launch file that is already provided to you. So when you're developing your own navigation package, you always have to keep this particular demo file as a reference. So the Turtlebot base. So when the way that robotists usually develop autonomous navigation robot, the easiest way to do it is when you're designing the robot, you'll need to ensure that the base of the robot is very similar in dimensions, and the properties of that base of the robot is very similar to that of the Turtlebot. Because then if that is the case, you don't have to design your own package. So if you remember in the first session, I told you that you can reuse packages, right? So that is how you make your own robot while ensuring that you don't have to write the entire navigation stack from scratch. So let me just give you an example of kind of robots that you can develop. For example, here in SolidWorks, you have a really neat plugin. So let me just share this particular screen with you. Right. So when you're developing your own robots, the reason I have this image in front of me is because when you want to develop your own autonomous navigation robots, then using SolidWorks has this really good URDF conversion tool. And when you're designing your robot, the base dimensions that you use needs to be very similar to the dimensions that you use in your Turtlebot. So if that is the case, then you can reuse packages, and the same package can be used because the transforms will not drastically change. So you don't have to make many modifications to your navigation stack when you're designing your own robots. So if you have that luxury of sticking to the Turtlebot specifications, then this is what you would do. This is an example of a robot that I've designed, which will give you the same specifications as that of a Turtlebot. And then when you want to convert that to URDF, SolidWorks has a really good neat plugin that it has called Export to URDF. So this is a plugin that you can download. There are instructions on how to install this within SolidWorks. If on the ROS wiki. So okay, yeah, just as an introduction to what this is a CAD modeling software for those of you who are not familiar with what SolidWorks is. It's a CAD modeling software which will allow you to create three-dimensional structures. I told you before that you can create your own CAD models on Gazebo, right? But the problem with using that is Gazebo usually doesn't give you the flexibility that some of these CAD modeling softwares give you. So because of that, you will have to design your robots in a more flexible framework like SolidWorks. and then you'll have to convert that into a URDF file. And then for converting into URDF, this URDF exporter is given to you, and then here you can name the links that you have. So in this case, this will be the base link. This particular highlighted part will be the base link, and then the wheels as well as the top segment assembly here will be the child links. So as I told you, that's the structure of how the various the URDF of a robot is constructed. So if you do this, then it'll automatically create a tree here, a similar tree to what we saw. And then all you have to do after you create this tree is click on click done, and then uh, the URDF will be stored in a particular predefined location. And then that URDF you can directly import into your Gazebo simulation. So this is just a brief overview of someone of how do you use your customized models and convert it into URDF. This is the best method that I would suggest. Currently, I'm using SolidWorks version 2018, but the URDF converter works best in some of the older versions. So I would recommend, if you're trying this, you have to use SolidWorks 2014 or lesser than that if you're into hardware design. So someone was asking me, right, what is the scope of hardware design in robotics? So SolidWorks is an important tool in case you want to go into hardware design, because you can develop your own structures and then you can convert that into URDFs, and then you can use that for your simulations, both kinematic as well as dynamic simulations. So yeah, that's just an overview of how that process happens. Let's go back to the ROS Development Studio. Right. So we were looking at what the contents of these the AMCL underscore demo dot launch was. So you again have an argument which is called 3D sensor, which is basically so if you look at the let's first launch the Turtlebot and we'll see what the Turtlebot consists of, what it looks like. You'll be able to appreciate this more. So for launching a file, use the following command: type ROS launch followed by the name of the package, which is in this case Turtlebot underscore gazebo, and then followed by the name of the package in this case. Also remember that if you double tab, then you will get a list of possibilities that you can run. So you have AMCL underscore demo, Python exam. So these are all a bunch of packages, that a bunch of launch files that ROS Construct has already developed with their Turtlebot. So you have a gmapping demo.launch, and then a robot simulation test.launch. You have a startworld.launch, and then you have a turtlebot underscore project.launch. So I want you to launch this particular file, turtlebot underscore project. Just type in turtle and then tab complete, and then again P and then tab complete. And then this will start running. And then you will have a gazebo environment set up. And the way you see this within ROS Development Studio is that you have to click on Gazebo here. And then this simulation loads up. So the first thing that you would want to do is open Gazebo. So the way you would open Gazebo is under apps here, click on Gazebo. And then here, the command that you would have to type is first ROS launch space name of the package. Name of the package here is turtlebot underscore gazebo. And then the name of the file that you have to launch. In this case, we are going to launch turtlebot underscore project. So if you just type in turtlebot underscore PR and then tap complete, it will complete that for you. Right. So at this point, you should not be getting any errors. Warnings are fine. And then this should show up in your visualizer. So you can minimize this particular terminal. You don't need this again because it's going to get a little messy when we have a bunch of other terminals coming in. So let's take a look at this launch file again. So you can see that on this robot, if you need to click on the screen for manipulating the environment. let's take a look at what this robot is like. So it's made by Kabuki Robotics, and then the laser that you see here, the lidar that you see on top, this is the lidar. This is the frame of the robot, and then sorry about that. Just give me a second. Yeah. So this here is a Kinect sensor that they have modeled. So this is usually when you look at all these mobile robots, you have a Kinect sensor usually placed at the center of gravity of the entire robot. Somewhere in the middle is where they place it. And then you have a bunch of controls. So this is an accurate description of what the TurtleBot will look like. And so we need to then subscribe to data coming from this LiDAR and coming from this 3D camera. So if you see here, the arguments that are here are depth registration and depth processing. The reason that these two parameters are here is because this is a depth camera which gives you the RGB values as well as the depth, and it gives you a point cloud that you can get. So what is a point cloud? It's just three-dimensional representation of the various elements that you have in your in your environment. So you have a Kinect here. The Kinect sensor is what it tells you. Asus Xeon Pro is also supported. That's also another type of 3D camera. And then you have communication to the map server. The map file, and then you'll have this again points to where the map file is stored. And then the map server is the package, and then the type of message that that the name of the node is map server again. And then you have the localization nodes running here. Here you in this localization node, you need to know what the initial position, the initial Y position, the initial Z positions are of your robot. You'll get the initial pose and both the orientation as well as the position can be inferred from this. And then and then you also have a bunch of other customized files. So this is a part of the MoveBase package. The MoveBase package is what allows you to move from point A to point B using autonomous navigation. So these are all the components of what the launch file looks like. So let's also take a look at the, let's go back again, and then let's go on to the params folder. Sorry, there should be, param. So go into the param folder. And within that, if you remember, I spoke to you about a bunch of other packages. So there is the cost map, common params. And then there is the global cost map. There's the global planner. And then there's a Kinect cost map specifically designed. These are all customized. So sometimes the inbuilt ROS packages may not work directly with your camera. So these are all customized packages that you have available with for specific cameras. So this is specifically for Kinect, and this is specifically for Asus's camera. And then you have the MoveBase underscore params. MoveBase is the node that allow you to go from one point to another. And then, so yeah, these are all the basic components that we spoke about earlier. So you can see how they are organized into these folders. So unless you have these, you won't be able to see how your robot navigates. Right. Now, when you're dealing with a real robot like this, you will also have to be familiarized with how the data is being published for you to really understand what kind of computation that you can do with it. So I'm going to introduce you to a new ROS command here. It's called ROS topic list. So just a refresher of what topics are. Topics are basically channels into which data is published in the form of messages, right? So if you look at this, because we have loaded a robot here, you see that before we had only 3 topics. That was chatter and one topic actually, chatter, and a couple of other inbuilt ROS topics, which is ROS out and ROS AGG. Before, if you remember, in yesterday when we typed this command, later on, I think the last 5 minutes when we did this, there were only 3 topics. One was chatter, and then one was ROS out, and then one was ROS out underscore AGG. These 2 are standardized topics which gets initiated when you run your ROS core. But now if you see, look at the number of topics. So this is just a simple robot which is supposed to do some autonomous navigation. But even for that, you can see that the same camera is publishing messages under various topic headers. So the camera is publishing its raw data. It's giving its point cloud out, and then it's giving the various updates and then it's giving the various RGB values as raw data. It's giving the depth values as raw data. It's giving the RGB image raw data and compressing it into another topic. You can see that it's compressing the depth into another topic. So yeah, you will have a bunch of such topics that you will need to know. So when you're writing your own robot program, you'll need to know, which such topic should you actually look into. So for that, you need to understand the kind of data that all of these topics are, publishing out. And then if you remember, there's a clock here. The clock is very important because unless you know at what point in time and what timestamp each input of sensor stream is associated, then you won't be able to understand, what kind of um, where your robot is. You won't be able to relate where the robot is as to the sensor readings. And then you also have the joint states of the robot. Then you have the Kabuki laser. Now this is the laser which is here. This is the lidar. This lidar here publishes data under this Kobuki underscore slash laser slash scan. And if you remember, this is the slash scan data that we were initially subscribing to get where the robot is. And then mobile underscore nodelet, you have, yeah, here odometry, which is slash odom. And then this is what tells you where the robot is. So there's an encoder built into this robot, and then it'll publish data about where this robot is with respect to its initial position under this topic. Okay, so now that we understood that there are these topics which are published under this because of loading this robot, let's also view what the contents of this particular message is. So let's go to there's another command which is called ROS topic echo, and then followed by the message that you would want to see under the topic. So echo is basically a command that tells you what are the topics, what is the message published under the topic. So you'll just have to type in /o and then type complete. It'll complete it for you. And then I'm going to see what the type of messages is that, what is the type of data which is published under /dom. So as you see here, this robot is stationary, and these values that it's publishing. So the odometry of the robot is constant. It's not changing because we're not moving the robot, right? So you can see that you can get the XYZ positions as well as the angular XYZ positions, basically the orientation. So this is published under the twist data. So yesterday, if you remember, I told you that the messages can be customized, right? So data structures, if you look at it in typical programming languages, yesterday what we did was for the subscriber and the publisher, we used a message type string, but this is its own message type. It's called geometry underscore messages / twist. So that'll give you the various type of the construction of that particular message. And if you want to read into this topic, you will have to ensure that you have a Python script or a C++ script which can really go into each of the components of this particular data. So this becomes very important even if you when you want to extract this data to do some useful computation. And also remember, yesterday I told you that there was a function called ROS bag that basically stores all the information in a centralized place, and it will allow you to view them later. Now, do you see why it's important for us to run a bag file? Because when we run this, there is no way that you can find out what is the first sensor reading unless you store it. So that's the reason that if you want to store this data, and then you have to use something called a ROS bag, and then store all of that data. Right. So I would now encourage you to check out some other topics as well. So you can type out ROS topic list, and then you'll get the rest of the data. So if you're interested in what the image raw data looks like, you won't get the actual image, but you will you'll be able to see the pixel values of that particular image. So you can you can run ROS topic echo again. So ROS topic echo followed by the image raw. So this will just give you a bunch of values here. This is just pixel values of the raw data that's coming out. So this is of no use to us unless you do some post processing on this data. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to be doing is looking at something, another launch file that which is quite useful. Can you all please type this command, ROS launch turtlebot underscore teleop, and then keyboard underscore teleop dot launch. So the command is ROS launch space turtlebot underscore teleop followed by keyboard underscore teleop dot launch. Right. So looks like a few of you are getting it. Can the rest of you please let me know if you guys can see this as well? Now at the same time, also open ROS topic echo / odometry after you've done this, and open them in parallel terminals. Now, what basically this teleop command does with your turtlebot is that it allows you to move around with the turtlebot within your environment. And then by doing so, you'll be able to see how the odometry values change. And this command turtlebot underscore teleop and keyboard underscore teleop dot launch is a very important command, because using this command, you'll be able to create maps of the environment that in which you need to move around in. So for using this particular launch file, you will need to click on this terminal, and then you can use your keyboard keys. So it's U, I, O are basically you can use I and J and K for forward and backwards. So I want you to now use these keys to move this robot around the environment. So make sure that you clicked on this terminal, that the cursor in this terminal is blinking, and then only then will you be able to execute these. And then as you type left and J and L, you'll be able to move it left and right. And I is used to move it forward and backward. M is used to rotate it. And then this way you'll be able to move the robot along the environment. So this is very important, because any mobile robot, you need to have it move manually first before you can teach it how to do it autonomously. So can you guys all try this and let me know if your robot is moving as well? And then if you observe this odometry continuously keeps changing as you move your robot around. These XYZ values, which were initially constant, if you remember, these values were initially constant, but as you start moving your robot around, the odometry values that is being published continuously keeps changing. So you can verify by this method that your odometry topic is actually working, and that your robot is communicating properly with the topics, and that the sensor is correctly interfaced. So just as a reminder, you'll have to click on this particular shell for the commands for moving it around to be executed. Otherwise, the robot doesn't move. Right. So, and as you change the orientation and the positions, you can see that that directly reflects in the screen. Right. So let's move on. I would want you to let's get introduced to another tool that is very useful. In under tools, just open graphical tools. This window, just keep it open, and then inside another shell, open another shell, and then type the following command: ROS launch turtlebot underscore rviz, then type tab. It will complete it for you, and then that will give you turtlebot underscore rviz underscore launchers, and then followed by the name of the topic here, which is view underscore. Let's type double tab here. When you see double tab, you'll be able to see the various options available to you with this command. So here you can see that there are view navigation, view planning, view robot, view teleop navigation, view model, view mapping. There are a bunch of these topics. So let's go for the view mapping. Let's go for that particular topic, launch file. And then when you launch this, it should reflect on this particular screen here. Right. So yeah, before that, open another shell and then run the following command. ROS launch turtlebot underscore navigation, and then a gmapping demo. So this is basically the file that we were looking at prior to this. Gmapping underscore demo.launch. So just run this file. It will start communicating with your Gazebo instance, and then rerun the following, the rvis command. So hopefully you should not have any errors while you're running this. So this is good, and then we can start with view underscore mapping.launch. Right. So if you remember, we had laser data which was coming from the lidar. So this here, what you see here, this is the interface for the this is the interface that you use for kinematic visualizations. So this particular simulator is called RViz, and RViz usually is what allows you to see the various topics in visualization. If you remember, we saw the when we tried ROS topic echo and then followed by the scan data, we just got a bunch of gibberish, right? So here you actually get to visualize that laser scan. So if you see here, even though there's no environment here, it just subscribes to the scan data. Now, how do you know what is it subscribing to? You can see there's something called laser scan, and it's subscribing to this top. It's called /kobuki/laser/scan. All right. So when you see that, you can when you choose that topic, it'll help you to visualize exactly what those numbers meant. So when you type in ROS topic echo, right? So this was the gibberish that you were getting. So what does that actually mean is what you'll be able to see through this window. That you'll be able to see the meaning of this gibberish on the visualization tool by looking at the graphical tool viewer. And then what I would encourage the other guys who have already finished this is that using your teleop, I would play around by moving around this environment and just see how it varies. How does it get? Just see how the laser scan, changes as you move, change the orientation of the robot. So as you move along in real time, you can see the laser scans changing. So as you get closer to a wall, the thickness of those lines increase because it's more confident that that particular spot is has an obstacle in it. Right. Now, before we wrap up today's session, I just want to go through this particular map topic as well. Now, there's an issue with this online simulator, and that there is a communication issue with the map. So, what I would want to show you is, if you remember, I gave you in the pre-workshop tutorial a bunch of commands that you would need to run in order to have Turtlebot installed in your own PC. That particular configuration and installation works really well. So I'll let you know what the topics are, the basic what the commands are in order for you to get started with autonomous navigation. And then later on, when you have your own system with dual boot, then you can try that. The reason is that the limitations of this online platform is that it has only two CPUs, which are now running at super high usage at 100%. So the mapping nodes, when we start running them, it will be beyond the scope of what this current configuration can handle. So because of that, I'm just going to be showing you a small video of how you do the other stuff. And then after that, you can ask me questions about anything related to what you learned today, or anything robotics in general. So let's just wrap up with that particular video. All right. So let me just walk you through what's happening here. So this is my dual booted system that you're seeing here, and then the reason that I have multiple terminals is in one screen is because I use a particular application called Terminator. Now Terminator I highly recommend for anyone who's getting started with ROS, because when you have to run multiple terminals simultaneously, you just saw the merit of doing that. So when you have to when you have to run such multiple terminals, this is a really neat way of running multiple terminals without having to minimize the old ones. So I highly recommend that you download this when you dual boot your own systems. So the first thing that you have to do is, when you've installed your ROS package, the first command that I'm running is called ROS launch turtlebot underscore gazebo turtlebot underscore world.launch. So it's the same thing that you just did with your own systems. And then this will open up the gazebo simulator, and it's much faster when you have a dual booted system. So can you all see the environment here on this? The environment is basically something I designed just for the sake of demonstration. It's basically a customized environment wherein you can basically design what you want for the sake of demonstration. I've made a bunch of obstacles and a bunch of paths within which the robot can go. Right, so that's just about the environment. And then the second command that you will have to run is called gmap underscore demo. We just did that as well in order for us to see the laser data. So run that as usual as well. And then when you see registering first scan, can you all see that at the end of the terminal here? Terminal, you can see that there is something called registering first scan. So when you see that, that means that your laser data and your G mapping is communicating correctly. That if you don't get that, then there's a problem. Now, after that, you'll have to run your turtlebot underscore rviz underscore launchers, which we also did. And then in this case, we looked at the laser underscore. We looked at the laser data, mapping underscore launch underscore mapping, I believe, view underscore mapping. That was the launch file that we had launched. But for mapping, we have to launch a file called view underscore navigation, which is also present. And I think you can try it out, but I'm not sure if if the online server will let you do that. And then once you run that command, you'll be able to see the environment, which is the rviz environment. Now, if you remember, I told you that there are two kinds of, there are the entire workspace is divided into grids, and then there were thresholds that we saw in the contents of the YAML map file. So that was the contents of that file were what is the occupancy threshold and what is the free threshold. So if 65% of a particular object occupies a particular spot, then it's given as completely occupied, and if it doesn't, then completely not occupied or completely free. So the gray squares that you see here are all examples of what completely unoccupied squares. And then there's a black blob that you see here, right? So that black blob is an example of a completely occupied square. And then on the left hand side, you can see that laser scan is being published. You can see that map is there, and then under map you can see the topic under which it's publishing. It's called /map. And then you have a bunch of the resolution of that map is also given here, and then you can see the position and orientation. So all of these features you can get to know by looking at the dashboard on the left. And rviz and gazebo are also constantly communicating with one another. So as you make some small changes in gazebo, you can see those changes being reflected onto rviz. Now, when you're running your map functions, what you have to do is you have to, under local map and under cost map, there is a topic option. That topic option has to be changed to /map, because what we need is the local map has to subscribe to the map which is being published, and using that, it needs to ensure that it starts building the map process. And then so that the local map, just as a refresher, is basically the small intermediate maneuvers it needs to do in order to avoid obstacles or make small local changes in its path. And global map is basically the entire eagle eye view of the entire map, and it'll the global planner will allow you to go from point A to point B without making sure that you drift away, without drifting away from your destination by making local maneuvers. So you have a cost map function, and inside that you also have to change the topic to /map. So this is remember these two steps, because this is very important when you're trying to do it on your own systems later on. And then here I'm opening a keyboard underscore teleop, which is what we just did. And then using that, we'll be able to move our robot along. And then as we move our robot on the screen, you'll be able to see that the map gets updated every time. So as the robot moves in circles, you can see that various other parts of the map, which was not there before, is getting updated. So using the laser scan data, you are able to now see your robot making the map from scratch. So in order for you to completely map the area, you will have to move the robot across all of these obstacles. You can see it move, and then as you move along all these obstacles, you'll be able to find out what the you'll be able to encapsulate all of these obstacles within your map. And unless you have an accurate map of your environment, your autonomous navigation will not work properly. So that's the process, and then eventually when you move across the entire arena, you will have your map completed. So yeah, so that was the entire process of creating a map. So that's how you create a map from scratch, and then that map is then stored as a .pgm file and as a .yaml file. So I'll be sharing a PPT after this, so that you'll be able to get these resources on how to do it. The process of installing Turtlebot is also enlisted in the pre-workshop tutorial. And so if you follow those steps in your local system, you'll be able to set that Turtlebot simulation up. So once we have our map, I have another video now that will show you how these by using a map, how is it going to go from point A to point B. So here's an example of a map that I have built beforehand. So the environment that I just showed you, I made sure that the robot goes to each of these points. And by doing so, you'll be able to see the entire map being built. So this is an example of what a good map looks like. So you should make sure that there are no overlaps when you do your map. And so opening this environment, let's see how the functions that you will have to carry out in order to make autonomous navigation possible. So on your screen here, you can see that there is something called 2D nav goal. So if you want the robot to go from point A to point B, you just have to click on 2D nav goal, and then it'll take your robot to the particular position. And before you start this, you will also have to click on 2D pose estimate. And 2D pose estimate is basically it'll tell you what is the direction that the robot has to face once you've got there. So it tells you both the orientation of the robot as well as the position of the robot at a particular space, point in space. So as you can see, every time I'm typing every time I'm assigning a new 2D nav goal as well as 2D nav pose, there is a red arrow which is formed in that particular spot. So that tells us that there is a a waypoint which is associated with that. So after you've completed assigning all the waypoints and all the positions or the poses that your robot has to be at, you will have to go back, and then you can then start autonomously navigating from these point from one point to another. So I'm just briefly going over this because of the shortage of time, and let me just give you an overview of what's happening here. This is a cost map that is being generated, and then you can see here in green and red what is the path which is followed by the robot in order to go from here to here. So the green path tells you the path that the robot has to follow. So there's a constant communication happening between the local and global planners in order for it to make sure that it goes to that. If you can see there, there is always a constant modification of the short-term path. That is because the local planner is changing what its path needs to be at every instant of time, and then what you're seeing there is again being reflected on the gazebo environment. And this is how it goes to from one point to another, and every time it reaches to the next waypoint, it plans a new path to go to the next subsequent waypoint. Right. So for you to learn more about this particular how this works, I recommend this blog called moorobots.com/blog. Let me just show you what that looks like. So if you can see, there is this link is quite helpful, especially if you want to design your own robot from scratch. This blog has a really good tutorial on how the ROS navigation stack works. Given the introduction that I've given you, you can use this as a resource in order to create your own robot. So he goes through the various components of a robot. You have open loop control, closed loop control, and there was some people asking me about what are the various career options. So controls is definitely one of them. So controls in robotics, as well as computer vision in robotics, and what we just went through in brief today was perception in robotics. So these are all the various broad fields in robotics in which there is a really high demand for jobs. Yeah, so if you have any questions at this point for me, it's up to you to ask me anything related to either today's workshop, robotics in general, or if you want to know about this projects I have done or experiences I've had, I'll be happy to share them as well. So this particular blog is pretty useful because it teaches you how to start your it has a video walkthrough as well as making your own robot. It creates a 2D differential drive robot, which is basically a very simple two-wheel robot, and it has a caster wheel attached to it. So this blog walks you through, how to model it, how do you convert it to a URDF, how do you import it to Gazebo, and then how do you start, how do you start saving a map, and then how do you load the map for autonomous navigation. Right. So does anyone have any questions? Okay, what's the difference between octomapping and slamming? I really don't know. I'm not sure. I have to find out. Actually, if you means well, what is slam is basically what I told you was it's that in a simultaneous it's a process wherein simultaneously you'll have to know where the robot is in a particular position, as well as you will have to also know where the what the sensor data from the map is. So when you have sensor fusion happening, wherein both of these happen simultaneously, that is called SLAM. But with regard to your question about octomapping, I am not sure. So I'll have to find that out, and maybe you can drop your email. I can answer that question. Okay, creating your own environment in RDS, you mean your Gazebo environment? So Gazebo environments, I think you'll have to do it in your local system, and then you can import environments onto your Gazebo system. But I feel that see this RDS again, I'm just using it for the sake of this workshop. I feel I highly don't recommend that you use this for any development work that you're doing. Because of the limitations in the processing power. So even if you do create your own environment, for you to later on use it for doing any meaningful deployment, the resources here are limited, and if you want to buy the premium version, it's pretty expensive in my opinion. So the best option for you to do is buy your to get your own system. So let me just share a screen of my virtual machine, and then I can show you how your own Gazebo environment can be built. Right, so I'm currently on my virtual machine, and as you can see, there is the Gazebo. The Gazebo application here will allow you to create your own files and so on. Create your own gazebo environments and use that. Use those world files that you create. Just a second. So the issue with even having virtual machines to run your ROS files is that because you're splitting your resources between your main system and your virtual machine, you have compromised abilities to, to really make complete use of your hardware. But yeah, here you have your gazebo environment, and when you want to create your own ROS files, so this particular environment that I have open right here is basically the turtlebot underscore world. So this, when you install the turtlebot package, you'll get this along with the turtlebot package. So you just have to do ROS launch, and then when you do ROS launch turtlebot underscore turtlebot underscore gazebo followed by turtlebot underscore world dot launch, you'll get access to this, and then you can modify this world by inserting by going into the editor here. So there is something called a building editor in Gazebo. So this building editor is a really neat feature of Gazebo, wherein you can create your own structures. So I have a wall feature here, and then I can create, my own structures that can that you can put your robot environments in. So you can pretty much create any shape, and these are the standardized, available features that you have. And then whatever you create here on the blocks editor is reflected down here on the screen. Right, so you can create windows and then doors. So in case, suppose you have a project that you would want to work on, and then you want to simulate the entire setup of how the autonomous robot goes through the various components in your environment. In that case, this allows you, gives you a really neat way of modeling those particular aspects, and then you can add your own color here, and then that you can do only in the 3D environment. You can change the color of the walls that you add, and then you can give it various textures. So the environment that you saw in the RDS is basically it allows you to that was also created, using using the block the world editor here, the building editor, and then you can use save, and then you can save this model somewhere in your building editors. It's usually saved in this particular file, and then in your ROS launch file, when you're initializing your world, you need to ensure that this location is specified in that launch file every time you create a new environment. So that's about how the building editor works, and then you can also use Gazebo to create your own customized robots. So there is limited capability here, but you can use the capabilities here. Let's take a look at the model editor. So in the model editor, you'll be able to use customized. These are the three basic primitive shapes that you have, and anything that you build will have to be a combination of these. And that's the reason I told you it's quite limiting, because if you want to have your own profiles or various types of shapes and geometries, in that case, the model editor is not a very friendly tool for designing as such. So for designing, if you want an open source tool for designing, then I'd highly recommend Blender, because the Blender tool allows you to design a lot of these robots, and then there's a converter for URDF again with Blender that you can then import into this environment. So that's about the model and building editor. And then once you have a world, I believe that you can import your own worlds onto RDS. Although I haven't tried it, because I'm just using this for the sake of this workshop. I haven't explored what the how to create the model file. Right. So at this point, if you want to explore some other features within RDS, you can. Let me just log in again to RDS and I'll share my screen with you. Right. So does anyone else have any questions? If there are no more questions, then I'll just do a quick recap of everything that we did today, and then we'll wrap up. And then I shared the link of the blog that is available in which you can wherein you can see the rest of the commands that you would need to complete the the autonomous navigation. So I highly recommend that you do this either on your virtual machine, and for the virtual machine, make sure that you see the pre-workshop PowerPoint. I've shared all the steps that you need to go through to set up your virtual machine. You have two options. You can either use virtual box or you can use VMware. VMware has slightly better graphics, and so when you're running Gazebo, you get slightly higher frames per second. And so for that reason, I recommend that you use VMware. However, sometimes you do get some dependency errors with the VMware, but those are not too hard to solve. If you Google the errors, you'll be able to understand what they're for. They need to do. You need to do some minor modifications. You'll be able to get those. Yeah, and then if you go to that link that I just shared with you, I highly recommend that you try start building your own robot from scratch. It's a two-wheel robot wherein you'll be doing the URDF from scratch, and hopefully with the explanation I've given you today about how a URDF is constructed and the various components of a ROS navigation stack, you will have a better arsenal for you to really understand what's happening in that in those tutorials. So yeah, so thank you so much for joining me for today and yesterday. So if you have any feedback on how this workshop can be improved the next time we do another raw space workshop, just do let me know in the comments. I'll be happy to take those. um, yeah, in the meantime, let me just give you a small recap of what just happened, all the way from launch files, what Gazebo does, what are URDFs, and then with that we can wrap up today. So yes, we just initially we spoke about what ROS launch files are. Launch files are essentially a convenient way for you to run multiple nodes together at the same time. And then the syntax, you tried implementing the the chatter and the subscriber and the publisher nodes simultaneously. And doing so, you were able to understand the way that the dependencies for a node, as well as what is the syntax that you need in order to run these. And then we spoke about the Gazebo simulator. The Gazebo simulator, why is it useful? What are the capabilities of the simulator? And then the various components of the Gazebo simulator. The world files and the model files, I just showed you, the capabilities of what you can do to customize and design your own world files. You then have to store those world files in a particular spot, and then you can use that to use those files in your launch file in order to use those world files for launching your environment. And then we briefly went over what URDFs are, and then I showed you my SolidWorks environment wherein URDFs were converted. The SolidWorks to URDF plugin was used, and conversion of SolidWorks to the 3D model to URDF happened. And then after that, what we did was we went over the ROS navigation stack. And the ROS navigation stack, the fundamentals for robot localization and then mapping, and then the process of doing those two things simultaneously. And then we defined the SLAM problem of what it stands for. And then these are the various components. The transform is basically how the two various coordinate systems within your navigation stack, how they're related to each other. The transformation matrix enables you to find the relationship between these two. The odometry gives you the position of your robot and the orientation of your robot with respect to the initial position. And then the scan allows you to get the LiDAR data, and then you are able to see in how the is in accordance to the in accordance to the as you move the robot around. And then map data is what is basically a map file which is either given by the server or one that you constructed. So I showed you a video on how to do that. And then the twist is basically the orientation that the robot must be at the destination, and then the move-based package which we spoke about here gives you the position of the position and the position of where the robot has to be. And then we looked at the structure of the ROS navigation stack, wherein we have a config file, we have launch files, and we have maps. And maps are stored in two types of configurations. One is a PGM file and a YAML file, and a config file which has the local cost map, the global cost map, the base local planner. And then we have our launch files. The launch files had these components wherein the G mapping demo and AMCL demo. The AMCL is for localization, and G mapping is for mapping of the robot. So yeah, and then moving on to we looked at the brief overview of what the AMCL launch file looked like. Right. So that was an overview of the stuff that we were able to cover. So at this time, does anyone have any final questions? If you don't, then we can close the session. So just a quick question: does anyone have any feedback on next time we do a follow-up? I would also want to know what you guys are interested in, so that I can get a what aspect of ROS would you like to know in terms of the next set of tutorials? Would you like to know how to design your own robot and write your own UIDFs? Is that something you would be interested in? So that we can plan another workshop soon of a similar style. Maybe what I would suggest that you guys do as a takeaway after this workshop is first get your own dual booted system. Dual booting takes a little bit of time, but trust me, if you're planning on using ROS on a long term, that is the best way to go about it, because even if you follow the same steps that you do on your virtual machine and you do the same things on your dual boot, it might not work on your virtual machine, but it does work. So yeah, just to recap, the resources that I suggested yesterday. So the first resource, the ETH Zurich one, especially if you're looking to explore ROS with C++, then in that case, I highly recommend that you do that set of tutorials. So it's you just have to go to the RSL YouTube channel, the Robotic Systems. This is by ETH Zurich, and they have really, yeah, this one, the programming for robotics with ROS. This tutorial is taught by professors who who really do know their thing. And in case you guys are interested in autonomous navigation, there's a really good course that I would suggest. It's called Autonomous Mobile Robots on EDX. And this is also taught by ETH Zurich. I think this is by Autonomous Systems Lab, ASL. And so here, the stuff that you'll be able to learn is describe the basic components and algorithms required for mobile robot locomotion, environment perception, and probabilistic map-based localization. Robotics researchers that I think you should look for. These guys that you see here on the screen, Roland Siegwart, David Escaramuza, and Marco Hutter. These guys are all really good roboticists, and also some good roboticists that I think you should follow. Definitely check out the various labs by UPenn if you're looking into aerial robotics. So these guys, the research in aerial robotics by UPenn is best. And if you're looking into courses on aerial robotics, then this Coursera course, which details the entire set of aerial robotics courses, I highly recommend. It's not really related to ROS, but to understand the various components of it, you'll be able to use ROS to integrate all of that together. And I believe this is done with ROS, this course. So the Penn Air Lab, so I definitely think you should check these out. The Air Lab on Penn, Vijay Kumar is definitely one roboticist that you have to follow. Then Carnegie Mellon's robotics research is also really good. So in case you guys are wondering, to follow what the latest research is. So there is recent research on how reinforcement learning and robotics are all coming together. And if you're interested in reinforcement learning, then in that case, I would highly recommend UC Berkeley's Bear Lab. So the Berkeley Artificial Intelligence and Research Lab, their research is mainly focused on to using reinforcement learning and combining that with with ROS. So they have a bunch of research that's happening which combines wherein they teach robots how to learn behavior, intelligent behavior, and the research that they're doing is really awesome. And yeah, so this is definitely one lab that you should check out. If you're into aerial robotics, the best places for aerial robotics is University of Zurich, ETH Zurich in Europe, and then University of Pennsylvania. These three guys, these three labs are probably your best resources. Um, and also, Worcester Polytechnic Institute has really good robotics research. In case if there's anybody here who's looking for applying for higher education in robotics, then these are institutions that you should look at applying to in case you are looking to do your masters in robotics or a PhD in robotics. Okay, so yeah, if you have any more questions, just let me know. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining me. I hope this was of some use to you. I'll just let you know. You'll get to know again on the WebEx portal if there's another tutorial coming up. I think by next month there will be another tutorial either as an extension to ROS, and I'll definitely consider the stuff that you guys recommended in terms of including the OpenCV and design. I think those are all interesting topics, and definitely I would highly recommend that you try it out for yourself so that you'll be able to get some familiarity with it. Although when we do that workshop, it will be from scratch. So yeah, if you have any other questions or feedback, just let me know. If not, then we can end the session. So yeah, guys, please stay in touch with me in case you're developing your own applications. I'll definitely be able to collaborate with you. In case you have any ideas of robots that you would want to develop, then we can definitely get in touch. You can find me, you can email me, and then we can get connected either through a call or whatever other medium. So it will be good for collaboration. The whole point of ROS is that it promotes collaboration. So definitely we can, I can help you guys, take your ROS skills to the next level in case you want to stay in touch after the workshop. All right, so thank you so much. I'll be closing the meeting now, and then stay tuned. Maybe in the next month or so, you'll be getting another WebEx meeting, and then I'll also make sure that you guys get an invite so that you'll be able to join. Thank you. It was really good. You guys were a great audience. The interaction was really appreciated, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye.